Welcome back to another project. In this project, we're going to create a tip calculator. As you can see from the final version of the project, we have a container here with the title tip calculator. Then we have two inputs, one for the bill amount and one for the tip percentage. For example, we can choose a $100 bill amount and a tip percentage of 20%. And if you click on the calculate button, this is going to calculate the total amount that the customer should pay to the store, for example. So as you can see, we have designed this tip calculator using CSS with a modern look. Then we use JavaScript to get the values from these two inputs and calculate the total amount based on those values. We're also going to add an event listener to this button to trigger a function that will calculate these amounts. In the next section, we're going to start building the HTML part of the project. So, see you in the next section. All right, let's start our project. In this section, we're going to work on the HTML part of the project. As you can see, we have placed the final version here for comparison. As you can see, there is a container in the middle with the title tip calculator, and then we have two inputs, one for the bill amount and one for the tip percentage. And finally, we have a button to calculate the result. The first thing we need to do is create a folder, and we're going to open this folder inside Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to name it after our project, which is Tip Calculator. And once we have created this folder, we can open it in Visual Studio Code by right-clicking on it and selecting Open with Code. So now we have this folder set as the default folder in the Explorer section of Visual Studio Code. As you can see, it's called Tip Calculator. Let's close the Welcome tab. And here we just create a new file and call it index.html. Once we have created the HTML file, we need to create the HTML5 boilerplate, which we can add by typing an exclamation mark. If you have activated your Emmet abbreviation, you should see this suggestion. And if you press Tab, you're going to get the HTML5 boilerplate. Let me explain this real quick. Here we have the doc type, which tells the browser which version of HTML we are using. As we are using HTML5, we just need to have HTML here in the opening tag. Then we have the HTML tag, which wraps both the head and body sections. The opening HTML tag has a lang attribute, which defines the language of the page. And since we're using English, we just need to write NN for the language, which stands for English. Then we have the head tag, which includes the metadata tags and also the title tag. Among the metadata tags, the first one relates to the charset attribute. For HTML5, UTF-8 is recommended because it contains nearly all characters and symbols. Next, we have the compatibility metadata tag, which tells the Internet Explorer browser to use the most recent rendering engine, which is Edge. Then we have the viewport metadata tag, which helps control how the page appears on different screens. Here we're setting the width of the browser to the device's width. For example, someone using a mobile phone will have a smaller browser width than someone using a desktop or tablet. And here the initial scale is the initial zoom level of the browser, which is set to 100% by default. After that, we have the document title. Now let's open this website in the browser using the extension we installed, which is called Live Server. If you click on Go Live, it's going to open the site in your default browser, which in my case is Google Chrome. You can see that it's opened on port 5500. The file is called index.html and the title is document. Let's bring the website to the right side of the screen and Visual Studio Code to the left side. Now let's change this title to the name of our project, which is Tip Calculator. As you can see, the title has now changed to Tip Calculator. After that, inside the body section, we're going to add a container that will wrap everything on the page. So I'm going to add a div with a class of container by just typing .container. If you press enter, we'll create a div with a class of container. Inside this container, we're going to add an h1 tag that says tip calculator. After the h1 tag, we're going to add a paragraph that says enter the bill amount and tip percentage to calculate the total. After the paragraph, we're going to add two inputs, and each input is going to have a label. So I'm going to add a label, and this one is going to be for the bill. We'll set for to bill, and then inside the label, we're going to write bill amount. After that, we're going to add an input with the type of number. So just set type number on this input, and as you can see, we can now change the value inside it. After that, we're going to add a line break. We just type BR and we add a line break. This should be like that. And then we're going to add another label, and this label is going to be for the tip, which is going to say tip percentage. And this is going to be a number as well, an input with the type set to number. So in order to distinguish between these inputs later, when we use JavaScript, we're going to add an ID for the first one and call it bill. And for the second one, I'm going to add an ID called tip. And then after the inputs, after the second input, I'm going to add another line break. After that, we're going to add the button. So we're going to have a button with the ID of calculate. So I'm going to add a hashtag for the ID. We just type calculate and press enter. This is going to create a button with the ID of calculate. And inside the button, we're just going to say calculate. So we can see the button now. After the button, we're going to add another line break. So I'm going to copy this. And after the button here, we're going to have another label for the total, saying total. And this is going to be a span, not an input, because we don't want to change its value. And this is just going to have an ID of total. Okay, yeah, that was it for the HTML part of the project. As you can see, we've just added the h1 tag here, some paragraphs, two inputs with their labels, a calculate button, and finally another label for total. In the next section, we're going to work on the CSS part of the project, and we're going to style it like the one in the final version with this beautiful modern design, a box shadow, and a nice hovering effect for the button. So, see you in the next section for the CSS part of the project. All right, in the last section, we completed the HTML parts of the project. In this section, we're going to start styling the project using CSS. The first thing we need to do is create a CSS file here. So I'm going to create a new file by opening the Explorer section using Ctrl-Shift-E. And here we can click on this icon to create a new file called style.css. Before using this CSS file, we need to add a link to it within the HTML code. So we need to come back to index.html. And inside the head tag, right after the title tag, we're going to add a link tag. We just type link and then click on the one for CSS. This is going to create a link tag that sets up the relationship between the HTML file and the CSS style sheet. And the address is style.css because both files are located in the same directory. So now we can start styling our project. First, we'll start by setting the body style. Because we want to style some inputs, when you have an input, you need to add this at the top of your CSS, which is box sizing border box. This is going to help you style boxes like inputs better because it will calculate the extra borders and the space around the input. After that, we're going to target the body section, and I'm going to change the background color to a light gray, which is F2, F2, F2. As you can see, the color has changed, so the CSS file is working. And after that, we're going to change the font family to something called Helvetica. And if this font is not available, I'm going to use sans serif instead. So we've just finished styling the body section. Now we're going to start with the container, the div with a class of container, which is going to be used in all sections. So if you look at the final version, this is the container we have. So for the container, because it has a class of container, we can target it using .container. Then we open a set of curly braces. First things first, we're going to change its background color to white, okay? And then we're going to set a maximum width of 600 pixels. As you can see, it's smaller now, but it's not centered. So what I want to do here is create a margin. So I'll just set margin to 100 pixels on the top and bottom and left and right to auto. This is going to give it equal margins on the left and right. And if you remove the zoom level now, because it's currently at 200% zoom, if you remove this, you can see the box is actually this size. Next, we're going to add some padding, which is the space inside the container. And around the elements inside this container, it's going to be 20 pixels. And now let's add some box shadow. So let's add a shadow effect. We'll use 0 and 0 for X and Y, and 10 pixels for the blur radius. So you can see we get the blurriness in all directions. And let's change the color of the shadow to use RGBA, which stands for red, green, blue, and alpha. And here we'll set red to 0, green to 0, and blue to 0, which stands for black. And for the alpha, I'm going to set it to 0.2, which is 20% transparency. As you can see, we now have a shadow. And now we're going to change the border radius and add a 10 pixel border around the corners. Okay, that looks fine. In the mobile size, we have some margin too, which is nice. And that's it for the container. Next, the thing we want to style is this h1 tag, which is saying tip calculator. So I'm going to go outside this container and target the h1 tag here. And then let's set the margin top to 0. By removing the margin at the top, we connect it to the container and then bring it to the center using text align center. That's it. That's it for the H1. The next thing we want to style is the input. These two inputs here. So we're going to target these two inputs by just using the input selector. So let's add some padding. We'll use padding of 10 pixels. Then we're going to add a border of 1 pixel. It will be solid, which is going to be a regular line. And then the color will be CCC, which is a kind of gray color. After that, let's add some border radius and set it to 4 pixels. That will make it rounded in the corners. And then let's add some margin of 10 pixels up and down and 0 for left and right. And then I want it to span in all directions across the screen. So I'm going to set the width to 100%. Okay, as you can see, we now have two beautiful inputs. We can change the numbers. Okay, and then the next thing we want to style is this button. We're going to target the button simply by just using the button selector. So let's change its background color. We just use the background property, and the color I want to use is 4CAF50. And then let's change the text color to white. We also want to add some padding of 10 pixels. Next, let's remove the border. So we set the border to none. And let's set the cursor to be a pointer. So when we hover over it, we see a pointing hand as the mouse effect. And then we're going to add some margin, 10 pixels on the top and bottom, and 0 on the left and right. And we set the width to be 100%. Like this. So we're all set. I've added everything now. Now we can just make the text bigger. For example, you can change the font size to 18 pixels. And then we can make it uppercase. For example, just set the text transform to be uppercase. That's it for the button. The other thing I want to add to the button is that when I hover over it, I want the color to be different. So I'm going to add a hover pseudo effect. So we just add hover. And for the hover effect, I want to change its background color this time to 45049. 45A049. This color. And if you want it to be smooth, you can add a transition for the background color. We just copy this, and then we just add 0.3 seconds with an ease effect. You can see it's a little bit smoother. Okay, 0.2 would be enough. And the last thing we want to style is this total, the total amount. And we're going to target that because the total is inside an element with the ID of total. We can target it using that ID. We just want to change the font size to 24 pixels. And we'll set the font weight to be bold. And finally, we set a top margin of 10 pixels. You can't see it yet. We need to add some values here. For example, I'll just set 1000. We can see the value here and it's bold. So I'm going to delete this one because in the next section, based on the input, we're going to calculate the total amount using JavaScript. So first things first, we want to get the values of these two inputs. And then when we click the button, we're going to calculate the total amount and show it inside this span, all using JavaScript. So see you in the next section for the JavaScript part of the project. All right, in the last section, we completed the CSS part of the project. In this section, we're going to work on the JavaScript, add functionality to the project, make it work with the inputs, and show the total just like in the final version. For example, here, if you choose a $1,000 bill with a 20% tip, the total is going to be $1,200. So the first thing we need to do is create a JavaScript file. I'm going to open the Explorer section using Control-Shift-E, and here I'm going to type index.js to create a JavaScript file. Before using the JavaScript file, we need to add a link to this file inside the HTML code. It should be inside the body section at the end of the body because all the content needs to be loaded first, and then we're going to manipulate it using JavaScript. So I'm going to add a script tag. I'll just type scn. Then I'm going to click on the second auto-suggestion, the one with the src. And the src, which is the source address, is index.js because both files are in the same directory. So now let's close the Explorer section. The first thing we need to do is add an event listener to this button with the ID of calculate. So here I'm going to bring in the button. I'm just going to call it btn element. And we're going to target that element inside the document. Because we want to target the whole browser document, we're going to use a method called getElementById. I'm going to pass the ID, which is calculate. Now that we have this element, we can just add the event listener to it. So we're just going to target this btn element we have and add an event listener to it. And the event we want to listen for is click. So when we click on it, we want to trigger a function, and we can either create the function here or simply call an existing function. For example, we're going to call the function calculate total, and then I'm going to create that function here. So I'm going to create the function and call it calculate total. For now, we'll just use console log. For example, we'll console log clicked. Next, let's open the console using F12. Go to the console tab and let's clear the console. And now, if I click on calculate, it's going to log clicked in the console. So this is working as expected. Now that we've confirmed the function is working, instead of just console logging, we're going to get the values of these elements, like the bill amount and tip percentage. First, we need to access these elements in our JavaScript. They are inside input elements. The first input is this one for the bill. It has an ID of bill. So I'm going to go to the JavaScript file, and then I'm going to create a constant. First, I want to call it bill input. And this is going to be equal to document.getElementById, but with the ID set to bill. So it will target the element with the ID bill. We can copy this line and use it for the tip as well. So we'll just change the name to tip, and the ID will be tip. Now we have access to these two inputs. Now we can simply get their values. So I'm just going to say const bill and value is going to be equal to this bill input, and we'll target its dot value. So now if I console log the bill value and open the console again using F12, I can change the bill value here in the input. For example, I can type 2000 or something similar. If I click on calculate, we can see the value of this bill logged in the console. So whatever value we have, for example, 32, when we click calculate, we get 32 because we're console logging the value of the bill. Now let's do the same thing for the tip. So I'm going to change this bill to tip using Control D so we get the value of the tip as well. Now we can calculate the total. We'll say the total value is going to be equal to this formula. We're just going to multiply this bill value by 1 plus the tip value divided by 100. So whatever the tip value is, we divide it by 100, add 1 to it, and then multiply it by the bill value. So now if we console log the total value, for example, if we have a $100 bill with a 20% tip, the total is going to be 120. So let's test it to make sure it works as expected. If you calculate it, as you can see, the total value is 120. If the percentage is 10, the total is going to be 110. But as you can see, for some values, we're getting some weird numbers. This is a JavaScript problem, but we can fix this one as well. This happens because it's based on binary values. So now, instead of just console logging, I'm going to bring in the input as well as this total. At the top, I'm going to bring the total element. So I'm going to copy this one. I want to change this to total span. And then this is going to be total. So now we have access to this element. So instead of just console logging, we can change the total span inner text to be equal to this total value. Okay, so now if we change it, for example, we just say 100 and we just say 20%, the total is 120. If it's 10, this is going to be 110. But for some values, we still get odd results. So to fix this, we just add a method called toFixed. Okay, toFixed, and then we just fix it to 2 digits maximum. So I'm going to say, again, 110. This is going to show it like this. 110 and, for example, 0 cents. If you do, for example, 2.5%, this is going to be $102.50. All right, so that was it for our project. I hope you enjoyed it and learned many things. We have learned how to bring in the elements, how to add an event listener to them, how to calculate the value based on the inputs, and how to print the value inside the output, which is our total span. So, see you in the next project.